want to throw up. I mean, it's literally, it just makes you sick to your stomach when you see that initial video. But again, that's a snapshot. As a professional, I have to look beyond just that one first video and look at the total picture, and that's what we're doing.
America is dealing with a true sickness, one that has adults and kids bringing weapons to school grounds, loaded weapons with the means to create chaos and mayhem, and charged with ensuring those kids and teachers are safe. The cops, law enforcement, slapped into near impossible situations when forced to act. And it's not just in grade schools or on college campuses. It's spread to everyday life where crime rates are soaring and killers have become emboldened, with a faction of society seeming to be just fine with cops being forced into a corner of non-action. Until, of course, someone dies. So many fronts to deal with. Let's get to it. Let's welcome back the former United States Attorney General and now Dean at the Belmont University College of Law in Nashville, Tennessee, Alberto Gonzales. Dean Gonzales, I want to thank you so much for joining us, and we now have an awful lot to talk about. Let's focus first on what happened in South Carolina. With regard to what the cop did, let me get your first take. Was it an abuse of power? And then what about putting everything in context, which is what the sheriff said here first, because America and the world just reacted when they saw one video and didn't know the whole story?
Well, that's right. I mean, you have to look at these things in context, and apparently the sheriff has done that now. And while it's clear that the student started this by refusing to be cooperative, by refusing to abide by the instructions and demands of the teacher and the school administrator, it appears, based upon the investigation by the sheriff and his department, that this particular officer did not follow the procedures of the office, and that's the reason why he was terminated. If as a parent, I'd have been furious at my child for acting the way that this particular student acted. Nonetheless, I think that most of us would agree that the actions of the sheriff went beyond the policies and procedures expected of peace officers within that particular department, and that's why he was ultimately fired. Let me just make this point. What I hope doesn't happen is that this student is held up as some kind of hero. Listen, the student acted totally improperly, and as a parent, I would discipline my child severely if my child acted in the same manner. So I hope what doesn't happen is that she's held up as some kind of hero, because that's the case here. I think there's blame to go around here, but again, based upon the investigation by the sheriff, it appears that the deputy sheriff acted outside the procedures, and that's the reason for his termination.
Let's talk about that, and specifically what you're talking about here, the way the teenager acted. It is an entitled situation in many ways, because we have reached a time in our society, I think you would agree with this as well, where we have people who are now emboldened, who believe that the cops won't do anything and almost seem to challenge them. Is it also not fair to say that with cops themselves, and what I mentioned earlier, what's happening on college campuses and school campuses, kids who are coming to school with knives and loaded weapons, that cops themselves have to end a situation, because there's no way of knowing what happens. When the cop walks into a room, they don't know what this person has, what they have on them, or what their intent is. So they still have to act to basically shut down a situation, don't they?
Well, that's totally true. Although I have to say, this is not a situation, at least on the outside, that looks like a sort of a dangerous situation beyond a disciplinary matter. And there's no evidence to indicate that this particular student was a threat to the police officer or a threat to other students. The concern that I have is that I think we are expecting too much of our police officers on campuses, college, high school, elementary school, in terms of being involved in the disciplinary process. I don't believe that that's an appropriate role for police officers. They don't have the appropriate training, in my judgment, to deal with these kind of situations, and so we see the outcomes as that we're seeing now in South Carolina. For a police officer, you're right, it's a very difficult situation because, again, while there may not be clear evidence of any kind of threats, you don't know for sure what's going on in that classroom, and so it's a very tough situation for the police officer to be in.
In your opinion, should the Department of Justice and the Federal Bureau of Investigation be involved in this case?
Well, we have to remember that the sheriff himself asked the Department of Justice to do an inquiry, to do an investigation. Without that request by the sheriff's department, based on the information that is public and that I'm aware of, I'm not sure that the Department of Justice would have initiated a civil rights investigation. There doesn't seem to be any reason to believe that the actions of the deputy sheriff was motivated in any way by race. And of course, there may be underlying facts here. There may be a history here involving this particular deputy sheriff that we're not aware of. But again, here you've got a situation where the sheriff asked the Department of Justice to come in and do an investigation. And so I don't think it's unreasonable the department would honor that request. It may be a fairly quick investigation, but based on the information I know, but for that request, I'm not sure the Department of Justice would have involved itself in this particular case, particularly since there's been quick action by the sheriff in terms of terminating the employment of this deputy sheriff.
Let's turn to something else, which is almost a side issue here. James Comey, the FBI director, we're talking about the FBI as well, he made a statement last week saying that additional scrutiny and criticism of cops in the wake of episodes like Ferguson may have led to an increase in violent crime in some cities as the officers have become less aggressive. Do you agree with that?
Well, I think it's too early to tell, but it just seems to me it would be human nature that if in fact the media, the police and law enforcement generally are being criticized, being overly scrutinized, I think there may be second guessing and making some tough decisions in very dangerous situations. And as a result, police may be not being as aggressive as they should be. Again, many of the decisions that occur within the law enforcement community are split-second decisions. And sometimes you get it right, sometimes you get it wrong. And I think to the extent there's more scrutiny, more criticism of the actions of the police officer, more questioning of the judgments of the police, you're going to have probably people not being as aggressive as they should be in protecting innocent citizens.
But is a lot of it warranted criticism? And I want to go back to, again, the fact that the world reacted when they saw one video, not the second, not the third in the South Carolina case, where the girl apparently put hands on the officers. So isn't that the bigger problem, that we're talking about criticism that quite often is not warranted and is a knee-jerk reaction?
Well, we saw it in Ferguson, of course. The initial stories coming out of Ferguson was that Michael Brown had given up, had raised his hands and given up. And so that was the narrative. That was the initial narrative. And, of course, that spurred all the protests. And so that is a problem that exists with respect to these kind of situations. What is the initial narrative? And unfortunately for law enforcement, in many cases, the initial narrative is one that paints the law enforcement community in a very dark light. And I think the media has a role to play here in sort of saying, let's wait until we get all the facts. I think the community leaders have a responsibility to ask that not only that there be a full investigation, but to talk to the community and say that we need to wait until we get the facts from that full investigation.
Dean Gonzales, you said it perfectly right there. It's what I have been crowing about for a while. It is context. It is stop the knee-jerk. Wait, put everything, know the facts before you make the decision. That's always a smart thing to do. Dean Alberto Gonzales, I want to thank you so much for joining us. I'll look forward to the next time we speak. Right back on the edge of putting American troops back on the ground in the Middle East, is there one reason why we should be convinced that this outcome will be any different than the ones before, considering what's happened in those ones before? Stay with us. The Hard Line will continue. Now this promotional announcement. The shocking new book, Unlikable, The Problem with Hillary by Edward Klein, could well be his next New York Times bestseller. Called by some the most powerful expose on Hillary Clinton ever written. In Unlikable, author Ed Klein offers a stunning, powerful expose of Hillary Clinton and her now floundering race for the White House. With unprecedented access, Klein meticulously recreates conversations and details of Hillary Clinton's behind-the-scenes plotting. Klein also reveals the angry rivalry between Hillary Clinton and Barack Obama. Unlikable retails for $29.95, but you can now get it with this free offer. It is an almost $30 value, absolutely free. Go online to Newsmax.com/Klein or call toll-free 800-850-8749. The 2016 election is approaching. Get unlikable. Be armed with the truth about Hillary Clinton. 800-850-8749 or newsmax.com/Klein.